Go slower if you spill it. Can you even afford to pay? The shareholder's voice sliced through the noise of the gala, cold and sharp, as Olivia set a glass of wine on the table. Laughter rippled across the room, that cruel kind of laughter that assumes you're too small to matter. She was just a waitress to them, invisible, someone meant to pour drinks and disappear. But this wasn't just any table. Sitting at the head was Manny Pacquiao, the boxing legend, the man who had built his empire with fists, grit, and discipline. Tonight, he wasn't in the ring. Tonight, he was about to sign a contract worth billions, a deal that could change the future of his investments forever. Around him sat men in suits, their Rolexes flashing under the chandeliers, women in gowns that screamed wealth, lawyers and shareholders buzzing with the kind of confidence only money can buy. And then there was Olivia, 24, a single mom, her plain black uniform hanging loose on her frame, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No designer clothes, no diamond jewelry, just a tray in her hand and shoes worn thin from too many shifts. To them, she was background noise, forgettable. The shareholder smirked, leaning back in his chair, his words loud enough for everyone to hear. "Careful, sweetheart. Break a glass here and you'll be washing dishes for a decade." The table erupted in laughter again. Manny's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered, sharp, assessing, as if he was already noticing more than he let on. And then Olivia did the unthinkable. Her eyes fell on the contract and her breath caught. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't sign that." The room froze. The gala glittered like a kingdom of untouchable wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors polished so smooth they mirrored the heels and leather shoes walking across them. Golden candelabras stood tall, their flames steady, throwing shadows that danced against the velvet curtains. Every detail in the seven-star ballroom screamed extravagance. Tables lined with silver cutlery, wine that cost more than an average worker's yearly salary, and a string quartet in the corner playing melodies no one really listened to. This wasn't an ordinary evening. The air itself hummed with anticipation. Tonight, billionaires, lawyers, and shareholders had gathered for a single purpose: to witness a contract signing that promised billions. It wasn't boxing gloves or roaring arenas this time. The man at the center of it all was Manny Pacquiao. Pacquiao sat at the head table, a symbol of calm in a storm of arrogance. He wasn't draped in gold chains or flashy rings like the men around him. His suit was simple, tailored, but his presence carried more weight than all the diamonds in the room. His eyes were steady, unreadable, the kind that belonged to a man who had fought battles most in the room could never imagine. In the ring, he'd taken punches that could break a body. Tonight, he was about to take on something far more dangerous, the pen hovering over $1 billion contract. Around him, the so-called power players buzzed. Lawyers in sharp glasses whispered last-minute clauses. Shareholders laughed too loud, flashing Rolexes with every gesture. Women in gowns that shimmered like liquid gold leaned close, their perfume heavy in the air. To them, this deal was history, in the making, the kind of empire move that cemented names into legacy. And then, moving quietly through the sea of power, was Olivia. She was only 24, her black uniform plain, her brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, no polished smile. Her shoes, nearly worn through at the soles, clicked softly against the marble. She moved with precision, balancing a tray, pouring wine without spilling a drop. To the room she was invisible, just another server to keep their glasses full, and their conversations uninterrupted. But invisibility comes with an advantage. People stop guarding their words around you. They stop noticing your eyes. They forget you're even there. Olivia saw everything. The way the lawyers pushed their pens too quickly. The way the shareholders smirked with the confidence of a game they thought they'd already won. The way Manny Pacquiao, calm and composed, glanced once at the contract, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second. No one noticed the waitress lingering near the head table. No one cared if she overheard. To them she was small, forgettable, unimportant. But she wasn't. Because in that moment, Olivia's eyes locked on the pages spread before Manny, and what she saw made her breath freeze in her chest. The deal that everyone celebrated as victory was a trap. The laughter started small, but in a room full of egos it spread like wildfire. The first insult had been enough to spark the others. "Look at her shoes," a young woman in a glittering gold gown sneered, her voice pitched high so it carried. She leaned toward her friend but made sure everyone around her heard. "They're practically falling apart. Did she borrow them from the kitchen staff?" Her friend, a man with a manicured beard and a smug grin, chuckled. "Probably. I bet she sneaks leftovers for dinner too." The table erupted in laughter. That sharp, rehearsed kind of laughter that didn't come from joy but from cruelty. Forks clinked against crystal glasses, shoulders shook. Eyes glinted with the delight of watching someone beneath them squirm. Olivia didn't flinch. Her hands stayed steady as she poured the wine, her face carefully blank. She adjusted, a napkin on the table as though the words hadn't reached her at all. But they had. Every syllable landed like a slap. She just refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her bleed. "Careful, sweetheart," another shareholder added, his Rolex catching the chandelier's light as he lifted his glass. "You spill that wine, and you'll be scrubbing plates for the next decade." The woman beside him, draped in a red dress that screamed money, curled her lips into a smirk. How ridiculous, a server lingering near a billionaire's table like she has something important to say. Another voice chimed in, nasal and sharp. "She probably doesn't even know what a merger is." The table roared with laughter again, a chorus of practiced cruelty. Each voice fed off the other, louder, meaner, like a pack circling its prey. A few guests nearby turned to look, amusement glittering in their eyes. They weren't mocking her directly, but they were watching, waiting. This was entertainment for them, a spectacle. Still, Olivia didn't break. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even let her eyes rise to meet theirs. She moved to the next glass, pouring with a precision so exact it looked deliberate, like she was anchoring herself against the wave of their mockery. Her silence spoke louder than any comeback could, but silence didn't stop them. At another table, a woman in a sequined dress leaned over, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Look at her hair. No stylist, no polish. Honestly, it's embarrassing she's even in here." Her companion, a man with a thin mustache, snorted. "The hotel must be desperate for staff." The words floated, heavy and poisonous, across the room. And still, Olivia kept moving. A glass here, a napkin there. Her face calm, her steps measured. She knew they were trying to crack her, to force a reaction, but she'd been raised to hold herself with discipline and restraint, and she wasn't about to let them win. The mocking laughter swelled until it became background noise, a cruel symphony beneath the glittering chandeliers, and then it happened. Olivia's eyes caught the contract. It lay open on the table in front of Manny Pacquiao, its pages filled with fine print and legal jargon. Her breath hitched in her chest as her gaze flicked over the lines. At first, it looked harmless, technical, boring, the kind of thing no one but a lawyer would care about. But then she saw it. Buried deep, hidden in the folds of words, was the clause. Her pulse quickened. A reverse takeover clause. Her late father's voice echoed in her memory. "Never trust it. It looks harmless, but it will gut a company in a month." Professor Daniel Carter, one of the most respected economists in the country, had drilled it into her as a child. She had sat by his desk, the air thick with chalk dust and the smell of old books, as he explained deal structures that most adults couldn't understand. At 16, she had lost him, but his lessons never left. She had read his notes 100 times, memorizing every warning. And now, here it was, staring back at her, hidden beneath the signatures and gold pens. Her grip tightened on the tray. Around her, the laughter still rolled on, oblivious. Shareholders mocked her, guests whispered, lawyers smirked. But Olivia didn't hear them anymore. Her focus was locked, sharp and unwavering, on the contract in front of Manny. For the first time that evening, Her face shifted. The mask slipped. Her eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition. She stepped closer to the head table, her movements precise as though guided by something beyond herself. No one noticed. Not yet. To them, she was still invisible. But Manny noticed. His gaze, calm and unreadable, flicked up at her just for a second. He saw the way her eyes lingered on the paper. He saw the sudden weight in her posture. And then, with her voice barely above a whisper, Olivia broke her silence. "Don't sign that." The laughter stopped like a cut wire. The air shifted. Glasses froze mid-air, forks paused halfway to mouths. Every mocking face turned toward her in disbelief. And for the first time that night, the invisible waitress wasn't invisible anymore. "Don't sign that." Olivia's voice was soft, almost fragile, but in the sudden silence, it cut sharper than glass. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then, like a wave breaking, the laughter erupted. Loud, cruel, echoing against the marble, and chandeliers as though the very walls wanted to mock her. "She thinks she's in a movie." A woman in diamond earrings laughed, her voice shrill with disbelief. "What's next?" A man in a pinstriped suit added, his tone dripping with disdain. "Is she going to tell us how to run Wall Street?" More laughter followed, a cruel chorus of voices that fed on each other's arrogance. Glasses clinked, shoulders shook, lips curled into smirks. It wasn't just ridicule, it was dismissal. But Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't shrink back, didn't stammer an apology, didn't look to her manager for help. She simply straightened her shoulders, her fingers tightening on the tray, for a second before she set it down on a nearby table. And then she spoke again, not louder, not desperate, but steady, calm, the way her father once told her truth should always be delivered. "Page 47, line 12, she said. Her finger pointed to the open contract in front of Manny Pacquiao, her hand unwavering. "Reverse takeover clause." The laughter faltered. A few shareholders exchanged quick glances, confusion flashing across their faces. One man with a thin mustache fumbled for the contract, flipping hurriedly through the pages. "What nonsense," he muttered, but his voice shook as his eyes darted over the lines. Olivia's voice didn't waver. "It looks harmless, but in 30 days it strips the parent company of its assets. Everything Manny has built, gone, handed over, and by the time anyone realizes, it's too late." The room buzzed with murmurs, low and uneasy. A lawyer, polished and arrogant in his sharp glasses, leaned forward. His tone was condescending, the kind used to silence a child. "Reading isn't understanding, young lady. This deal is airtight. Do yourself a favor and leave the legal talk to professionals." Olivia turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. Calm, controlled. "If you were a professional, you would have caught it before I did." The words landed like a stone in still water. The laughter didn't return this time. Instead, there was a ripple of unease, an invisible shift as people glanced at each other, then at the contract, then at Manny. And Manny wasn't laughing. He hadn't laughed once. From the moment Olivia spoke, his sharp fighter's eyes had locked onto hers, steady, searching, weighing. He had spent a lifetime reading opponents, looking for the faintest tremor before a punch, the smallest twitch of a hand before a strike. And in Olivia's gaze, he didn't see nerves. He saw conviction. The shareholders muttered among themselves. "Impossible. She's bluffing. How could a waitress know?" But Olivia wasn't bluffing, because in her mind another voice was playing. The voice of her father. She was 12 years old, sitting cross-legged on the carpet of his study. Stacks of books surrounded them, papers spilling over the edges of his desk. Professor Daniel Carter, chalk dust smudged on his sleeves, leaned back in his chair with a weary smile. "Liv," he said, tapping a page with his pen. "There are contracts that look like gold on the surface but carry poison underneath. One of the worst is called a reverse takeover clause. It's hidden deep, dressed up in harmless words. But once it's signed," he snapped his fingers sharp as a whip, "the company bleeds out before anyone notices." She remembered leaning forward, the ink-smudged page blurring in her young eyes. "But why would anyone sign it, Dad?" "Because people see what they want to see," he said, voice low and steady. "Money, victory, a quick win. They don't read the fine print. But you," he tapped her notebook, his eyes proud. "You'll see it. Always look deeper, Liv." The memory dissolved, but the words stayed etched into her bones. And now, standing in the center of a golden ballroom, surrounded by billionaires who thought she was nothing, Olivia felt his voice guiding her hand as she pointed to the line that could destroy everything. The mustached shareholder finally found it. His lips moved as he read, his face draining of color with every word. His hand trembled. "This," he stammered, looking up at the lawyer. "This can't be right." The lawyer's jaw tightened. "It's legal language. Complex. She doesn't—" "Don't lie," Olivia cut him off, her voice still soft but unyielding. "You missed it. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just hoped no one else would notice." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The woman in the red dress leaned back, her smirk gone, her voice a hiss. "Who do you think you are?" Olivia's answer was calm, almost gentle, but it struck like a blade. "Someone who can read the truth you ignored." Silence pressed heavy on the room. The mocking grins had vanished, replaced with uncertainty, even fear. For the first time, it wasn't Olivia who looked out of place. It was them. And at the head of the table, Manny Pacquiao leaned forward, the contract still in front of him. His hand rested near the pen, but he didn't move to sign. Instead, his eyes stayed on Olivia, sharp and calculating, like a fighter, measuring the weight of his opponent. The ballroom, moments ago buzzing with arrogance, now waited breathlessly. What would Manny Pacquiao do next? For a moment, silence pressed against the marble walls like a weight no one wanted to lift. Then, as if on cue, the laughter returned, forced, brittle, louder than before. She memorized a line from a book, sneered the man with the thin mustache, his voice shaking with a confidence he didn't actually feel. Probably rehearsed it just to get attention. Another shareholder, a red-faced man in a gaudy gold chain, barked out a laugh. "Exactly. A waitress trying to lecture us on mergers. This is grown-up business. She doesn't belong here." Their words were sharp, but this time the sound didn't echo the same way. There was hesitation in the chuckles, unease in the smiles. The arrogance that had filled the room was cracking, if only slightly. And then Olivia moved. Slow, deliberate, unshaken. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Its edges were worn soft, the ink faded but still legible. With steady fingers, she set it down on the table beside Manny's contract. The nearest shareholder leaned forward, curious despite himself. His face drained the moment his eyes caught the neat handwriting across the page. "My God," he whispered. It was a note handwritten years ago. At the top, in precise script, Clause XY, reverse takeover warning. Beneath it, calculations, examples, and finally a line underlined twice. Never sign if you see this clause. At the bottom sat a signature that once carried weight in every financial circle in the country. Professor Daniel Carter. The murmurs grew louder, a wave rolling across the gala. Some gasped in recognition. They had studied under him or read his work or built deals on his advice. Others tried to dismiss it, their voices frantic. This doesn't prove anything," the lawyer snapped, his glasses sliding down, his nose. He grabbed the contract, flipping pages with quick, jerky motions, searching desperately for a defense. "This is circumstantial, irrelevant." But his voice trembled. The woman in the red dress, who had mocked Olivia's shoes earlier, leaned in toward her companion. Her whisper wasn't low enough. "If that's Carter's note, then she's telling the truth." Her companion paled. "But if she's right, then—" "She's not right," the lawyer barked, louder now, desperation bleeding through, his Polish. "This clause is standard. She doesn't understand the context. You're all letting a waitress hijack the deal." His words rang hollow, because across the table the man with the thin mustache had gone silent. his eyes glued to the line of text Olivia had pointed out. His lips moved silently, repeating the words to himself. Finally, with a trembling hand, he slammed the contract shut. "She's not lying," he muttered. "It's here, exactly where she said." The gala erupted. Voices shouted over each other, some furious, some panicked, some scrambling for explanations. A few tried to salvage their dignity, insisting it was just a minor oversight, nothing more than technicality. But the color draining from their faces betrayed the truth. They hadn't seen it. She had. Amidst the storm, one figure remained utterly silent. At the head of the table, Richard Hargrove, the billionaire host of the evening, hadn't spoken once. His gray beard framed a face carved with composure, his eyes sharp but unreadable. He simply tapped his fingers against the table, slow, steady like the ticking of a clock, watching, waiting, measuring, and Manny Pacquiao. He didn't touch the pen. His gaze had never left Olivia. In the chaos, in the laughter, in the shouting, he kept his eyes locked on her with the same intensity he once reserved for opponents across the boxing ring. He had built his life on instincts, on reading the smallest shifts of an opponent's body, on sensing the truth behind their eyes. And in Olivia he saw no fear, no bluff, only conviction. The lawyer tried again, his voice rising above the noise. "Senator Pacquiao, don't let this child distract you. This deal is your legacy. Do you really trust a waitress over trained legal experts?" Manny leaned forward, his elbows resting lightly on the table. His hand hovered near the pen, but didn't touch it. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and deliberate, carrying the weight of both fighter and statesman. "In the ring," he said softly, "the most dangerous punch is the one you don't see coming." The room stilled. Manny turned his eyes to the contract, then back to Olivia. "And tonight," he continued, "she saw it before anyone else." The shouting stopped. The laughter died. For the first time all evening, the room truly went silent. Every shareholder, every lawyer, every glittering guest knew in that moment that the balance of power had shifted. The waitress they had mocked, ignored, humiliated, had just saved Manny Pacquiao from the knockout blow of his career. For a long, breathless moment, the pen hovered over the paper like the final blow before a knockout. Everyone in the room waited, eyes darting between Manny Pacquiao and the contract that gleamed under the chandelier's light. Then, slowly, deliberately, Manny set the pen down. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Shareholders shifted in their chairs. Lawyers stiffened, the guests holding their breaths. Manny's hand, steady as stone, slid the contract a few inches away from him. And then, in one fluid motion, he picked it up. Gasps echoed as the paper crinkled in his grip. The pen clattered against the table. Manny didn't shout, didn't raise his voice. He simply tore the contract in half. The sound was sharp, final, like thunder cracking through the gala. The room froze. Forks paused mid-air. Champagne glasses trembled in uncertain hands. The shareholders who had been laughing minutes ago now sat stunned, their faces pale, their power slipping through their fingers like sand. Manny laid the two torn pieces on the table in front of him, then looked up. His gaze swept the room, steady and unshaken, before settling on Olivia. "In boxing," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the hall, "you protect yourself from the punch you don't see coming." He paused, his words sinking like lead into the silence. "Tonight she just protected me from the biggest punch of my career." Gasps again. This time not from mockery but from awe. Olivia stood still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression unreadable. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't stepped into the spotlight to be recognized. But the moment had found her anyway, and she hadn't backed down. Around the table, chaos broke. The lawyer who had sneered at her scrambled to gather the shredded pages, muttering frantically about revisions and misinterpretations. The shareholder with the thin mustache buried his face in his hands, realizing just how close they had come to disaster. The woman in the red dress pressed her lips together, her earlier smirk gone, her eyes fixed firmly on her glass, like it might hide her shame. But others looked at Olivia differently now. No longer invisible. No longer just a waitress. Richard Hargrove, the billionaire host, finally broke his silence. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing on Olivia with a mix of curiosity and respect. "Professor Carter's daughter," he murmured, the recognition settling over him like a revelation. "I should have known." Murmurs spread. Carter's daughter? The same Professor Carter whose name once commanded respect in every financial hall? The man who had saved companies, who had predicted collapses others didn't see coming? And here was his daughter, serving wine under chandeliers and saving billions with a single sentence. The mocking whispers shifted. Where there had been ridicule, now there was unease, respect, even fear. Manny stood, his presence filling the room not with noise but with certainty. He extended a hand toward Olivia. She hesitated, glancing once at her tray as though it tethered her to the world. She had known, but then she set it down, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge before she stepped forward. Her hand slid into his, steady, calm. Manny's words carried again. "From today, she isn't just a waitress, she is my advisor." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Some gasped, some scoffed, others simply stared. But no one dared laugh. Not anymore. The lawyer sputtered. "Senator Pacquiao, with all respect," Manny cut him off with a glance. "Respect," he repeated softly, "is earned, and she earned it tonight." The words settled over the room like a final verdict. Olivia didn't smile, didn't gloat. She only inclined her head, her eyes calm, her breathing steady. In that moment, she wasn't the girl in worn shoes. She wasn't the single mother working shifts to buy diapers and rent. She was something more. She was seen. The gala shifted. After that, guests who had sneered at her moments earlier now stumbled over themselves to offer words of apology, their voices awkward, insincere. A woman in silver leaned toward her, her smile brittle. "That was, impressive," she said, as if the word could erase the cruelty of her earlier laugh. Olivia simply nodded and moved past her, her silence louder than any reply. The young server, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached her quietly, his eyes wide, his voice trembling with awe. You saved him." Olivia looked at him, her expression softening just enough. "I just told the truth," she said, and that was enough. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments. Guests, leaving in embarrassed silence, shareholders scrambling to recover what little dignity they could salvage, lawyers whispering frantically to cover their mistakes. But Olivia? She simply returned to her work, clearing glasses, stacking plates. Calm, steady, unmoved, because the moment had already passed. The punch had already been stopped. As Manny Pacquiao left the hall, his steps firm, his head high, the last words he spoke echoed in every ear that had once mocked Olivia. She saw what none of you did. And for the first time that night, the most powerful people in the room knew the truth. The invisible waitress was invisible no longer. The gala hall no longer glittered with arrogance. The chandeliers still shone, the marble still gleamed, the wine still flowed. But the air had shifted. Where there had once been smug laughter and cruel whispers, there was now silence, heavy and uneasy. The billionaires who had mocked her earlier, the ones who ridiculed her shoes, her plain hair, her very presence, now looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. Their jewelry sparkled, their gowns shimmered, their suits screamed wealth, but none of it could cover the shame burning on their faces. The lawyer, who had smirked at her like she was nothing more than a child, stood rigid, his glasses slipping down his nose, his career flashing before his eyes. The shareholder with the thin mustache, once so quick to sneer, avoided her gaze altogether, his hands trembling as he tucked the useless pieces of the torn contract back into his briefcase. And the woman in the red dress, who had mocked her like it was sport, sat frozen in her chair, her painted smile long gone, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. They had all underestimated her, and now they were the ones reduced to silence. Manny Pacquiao remained standing, his hand still resting lightly on Olivia's shoulder. His voice, calm but carrying authority, filled the room. "From today," he said, each word deliberate, "you're not just a waitress. You're my advisor." Gasps echoed once more, not of disbelief this time, but of recognition. The shift was undeniable. A waitress, invisible, mocked, humiliated, had just been raised above the very people who had tried to tear her down. Olivia didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply inclined her head, her face calm, her composure steady. She hadn't spoken for recognition. She hadn't warned him for applause. She had spoken because it was the truth. And truth didn't need applause to stand tall. Around the room, the whispers began again, but now they carried a different tone. No longer cruel, no longer mocking. Nervous, curious, almost reverent. Some wondered aloud if she really was Professor Carter's daughter. Others muttered about the collapse of reputations if this story leaked. And it would leak. Because in that age of cameras and recordings, someone had already captured the moment on their phone. Olivia pointing calmly at the clause, Manny tearing the contract. His words about the punch you don't see coming. By morning it would be everywhere. But Olivia didn't think about that. She thought only of her daughter asleep in their small apartment, blissfully unaware that her mother had just shifted the weight of billions with a whisper. The gala emptied, slowly. Some guests slipped out quietly, their heads bowed, their pride shattered. Others tried to linger near Manny, their voices dripping with fake admiration for the man who had just chosen a waitress over them. Manny brushed them off with ease, his focus still fixed on Olivia. "You reminded me tonight," he said softly, "that greatness doesn't always wear silk or diamonds. Sometimes it walks quietly in worn shoes and carries nothing but the truth." For the first time that night, Olivia allowed the faintest smile to touch her lips. The night ended, but the story was only beginning. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Pacquiao halts billion-dollar deal after waitress points out hidden clause. Clips of the gala spread across social media, replayed millions of times. The world wanted to know who she was. But Olivia didn't rush into the spotlight. She didn't take interviews, didn't boast, didn't try to prove herself further. She simply kept moving forward, her daughter's laughter still the anchor of her days, her father's voice still guiding her steps. And those who mocked her? They couldn't escape the fallout. The lawyer was dismissed quietly, his arrogance, no longer an asset, but a liability. The shareholder with the mustache lost influence among his peers, his credibility fractured beyond repair. The woman in the red dress? Her sponsorship deals dried up overnight. No brand wanted to be tied to cruelty caught on camera. Justice hadn't been loud. It hadn't needed revenge. It had simply balanced the scales. And Olivia? She walked taller, now. Not because of the title Manny had given her, not because of the respect she had earned, but because she had proven something to herself. That silence wasn't weakness. That calm wasn't invisibility. That the truth, her truth, had weight enough to shift an empire. She walked in carrying a tray, but walked out carrying respect that money couldn't buy. And if you've ever been underestimated, remember this: the truth always finds its voice.